Why did the Roman Empire have its own monetary system, Roman currency, while its reincarnation, the Holy Roman Empire, did not have its own monetary system? Why are the largest finds of ancient coins in the territory of modern Germany hoards of Roman coins, and not coins of the Holy Roman Empire? And finally, how did it happen that the silver in Roman denarii had an isotopic composition very close to that of the silver from Latin American mines, yet at the same time, American silver is absent from European Spanish coins until the 17th century? It's as if the silver did not belong to the Spaniards, but to someone else. Apparently, it belonged to the one who in the 16th century was not minting Spanish coins, but rather Roman ones, using American silver. And who could that be? There are three kinds of lies: damned lies, and statistics. This phrase was spread by Mark Twain, who attributed it to Benjamin Disraeli, the British Prime Minister during the reign of Queen Victoria. The same can be said about national histories, which were invariably rewritten and reprinted after every change of ruling dynasty or regime. But perhaps the most mysterious and complex part of world history is the history of the Church from the 15th to the 17th centuries, the key centuries of our history, which was not only rewritten and reprinted in 18th century fonts. We will talk about this separately, but also extended by 1500 years. Jesus Christ lived much closer to us, not 2000 years ago, but in the second third of the 15th century. At the end of that century, Pope Alexander VI Borgia invited Jesus' disciple Peter to Rome. His aim, so to speak, was to create a legitimate branch of Jerusalem under his control. The holy city of Jerusalem in the Holy Land with the Lord's Temple, not to be confused with the modern-day Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This was the sacred center of all Judeans. Who are the Judeans? We open chapter 21 of Exodus, the second book of the Torah, and read the first line of this chapter. Now these are the judgments which you shall set before them. And then there is a list of criminal and administrative articles of Moses' law, which he declared to his people. In Latin, laws or judgments are iudicia. Thus, we have the iudii, that is to say, people who live by the laws of Moses. From this also comes another Latin word iudex, judge. This word is signed by Pontius Pilate in this engraving. By the way, this gives an entirely different meaning, not as in the textbooks, to the blood tribunal over the Savior. Jesus Christ was condemned to death not within the Jewish religious community. Pontius Pilate was certainly not a Jew in the ethnic sense of the word, and the other characters in the 16th century engraving of the Pilate trial are clearly not of Semitic origin. So, Jesus Christ was not condemned within the ethnic Jewish community, but within the Old Testament Church, which was also formerly referred to as the Judean Church. It was only in the 19th century that this first or Old Church was assigned a purely ethnic or Jewish character. And by the way, the inscription on the crucifixion cross was written by Pontius Pilate in three languages: Aramaic, which was the original language of the sacred scripture; Greek, because the Jerusalem Jewish community was not just Semitic but also included Greeks; and Latin, the international language of Western Europeans, who were also residing in Jerusalem during the Gospel events. The titulus of crucifixion more than vividly testifies and confirms that responsibility for the execution of Jesus cannot be laid on ethnic Jews alone. And, of course, the Old Testament Church, the Church of all Judeans, belonged not only to Jews. Nowadays, the word church is associated exclusively with Christianity. But that's now. In the historiography of the 19th century and earlier, the history of the Church included an Old Testament period. During this time, the Church and its congregations lived according to the law of Moses. Therefore, all members of the Old Testament Church were Judeans. Not Jews, but specifically Judeans, that is to say, people living by the laws of Moses. These laws, including the Ten Commandments, are outlined in chapters 20 and 21 of Exodus. Regardless of their ethnic origin, language, or place of residence, Judaism was Catholic, which translates from Greek as universal. I'll cite one of the sources from the 19th century. By this time, the Old Testament Church had already been identified as ethnically Jewish. The author of this source is a well-known Russian Bible scholar Georgy Konstantinovich Vlastov. And a little later I will explain the relevance of Roman coins to the Old Testament, and later to the New Testament Church and to the Church in general. So, what is the Old Testament Church from the point of view of 19th century theologians and biblical scholars? The Christian Church is not a continuation of the Old Testament Church or its rebirth into a new one. The Church of Christ is created on the ruins of the ancient Church, although on the same foundation. And further, the new Church has primarily rejected the national character of the Old Church and all its institutions. It was created not from a nation or tribe, but from individual persons. Only Judeans, who belonged to the Old Testament Church, were called the children of God until the break of the covenant of the Judean people with God. Henceforth this right is given to all individuals of all races and tribes, not excluding the Judeans, those who have accepted the Lord, to be called children of God, believers in the Son of God. I'll add from myself that the transition from the Old Testament Church to the New Testament Church occurred, as already mentioned in my previous film, during the period from the end of the 15th century to the Council of Trent until the middle of the 16th century. This is most vividly evidenced by the Old Testament tomb of Pope Julius II, which fell into this transitional period, adorned by the Jewish prophet Moses and the mothers of 8 of the 12 sons of Israel, Leah and Rachel. Pope Julius II, before his pontificate, was the emperor of the Roman Church named Octavian Augustus. That is, he was a military leader, the leader of the Roman legions, at least one legion, with the right of civil authority in the occupied territory and the right to mint his own coin. By the way, this monumental fountain in Augsburg, Bavaria, with the sculptural image of Emperor Augustus, was erected at the end of the 16th century. Apparently, for the 100th anniversary of the city's foundation by Emperor Augustus. We will talk separately about the territories occupied by the Roman Church in the 16th century, yellow circles with papal keys, and in general, who the emperors of the Roman Church were, in one of the following films. And now, specifically, about the monetary system of the so-called Holy Roman Empire from this source. I quote, "During the course of that is the 16th century, 3 separate attempts were made to establish an imperial system that should displace all minor ones, and thus remedy the confusion. The first attempt was made by Charles V in his imperial mint ordinance issued at Esslingen on the November 10, 1524. Historians invented the Holy Roman Empire. It was easy. Paper endures all. However, it would have been impossible to mint millions of small copper and silver coins of this non-existent empire and then bury these counterfeit coins in the cultural layers of the corresponding epochs. If you have a historian friend, ask them to find at least one image of a Roman emperor from the Habsburg dynasty with the words Holy and Empire in his title. What historians call the ancient Roman Empire and the Holy Roman Empire of the Renaissance era was actually a union of the Roman emperor, the one in Vienna, and the Roman pope, the one in Rome, during the 15th to 17th centuries. This engraving from 1620 depicts the entire Roman Empire Totius Imperii Romani in Latin, which at that time included free German imperial cities, as well as states, kingdoms and principalities, belonging to the German Habsburgs and the Pope. Yes, the Pope also owned extensive territories in Western Europe until the 19th century. These are the so-called princely bishoprics. But what is Constantinople doing as one of the heads of the double-headed eagle in the scheme of the Roman Empire in 1620? We will also talk about this, but separately when it comes to the so-called Crusades. And now, specifically, about the monetary system of the Roman Empire. The monetary system of the Roman Empire after the reforms of Augustus was based on the gold aureus, equal to 25 silver denarii. 1 silver denarius was equal to 4 brass sestertii. 1 sestertius was equal to 2 brass dupondii. And 1 dupondius, 2 bronze asses. And now we read about the monetary system of the German Habsburgs at the end of the 16th century. As late as the Reichstag of Regensburg, 1594, desultory attempts were made to establish a uniform, monetary, system, but all practical idea of it had long ceased, and the regulation of mint matters henceforth fell into the separate jurisdiction of the various imperial circles. If the German Habsburgs had their own Roman Empire, given they were Roman emperors, they should have had their own imperial monetary system. However, by the end of the 16th century, this complex imperial entity did not have its own monetary system where each free imperial city minted its own local city coin, which in turn did not add authority to these coins beyond the cities where they were minted. Therefore, for example, free imperial German cities in the territory of modern Poland used Roman coins as more reliable in terms of their counterfeiting, as well as a means of accumulation, hence the abundance of hoards of Roman coins in Poland, not coins of free German cities. So why didn't the Roman emperors, or emperors of the Holy Roman Empire, as historians call them, have a single-state monetary system like that of the Roman Empire? The reason is quite simple. A pan-European or even a national monetary system requires more than just a mint and good coin masters. One also needs to be able to control the money circulation in this territory through their banking network structure. But the first banks independent of the Roman Church only started to appear during the Reformation. The oldest banking house of the Fuggers from Augsburg, the same city founded by Emperor Octavian Augustus, although considered the court bank of Maximilian I and Charles V Habsburg. In fact, the Fuggers were primarily Vatican agents through whom the Holy See conducted its financial activities outside its lands. This was the greatness of the Roman Church, that it almost monopolistically controlled the financial flows of Western Europe through its temples and monasteries until the era of Reformation. This, actually, became the main reason for the anti-church movement known as the Reformation and the Religious Wars. Princes and kings of northwestern Europe expelled Catholic priests and monks from local temples and monasteries, and on their basis created national churches, Lutheran, Anglican and so on, in order to control the financial flows on their territory independently through these, now their own, national churches and their network structures. Another crucial condition for a unified state monetary system is the state monopoly on money issuance, that is, a state monopoly on coin minting. And as we've already seen, the emperors of the Holy Roman Empire, the patchwork empire of Europe, did not possess such a monopoly. Coins were minted by everyone who felt like it. Kings, princes, magistrates of free cities and, of course, counterfeiters, for whose search a network structure was required, ideally, in every settlement of the state. But such a structure, capable of performing police functions, did not yet exist for the European monarchs at that time. However, the Roman Church did have such a structure for searching, interrogating, and investigating cases of counterfeiting. It was called the Inquisition, which translated from Latin means inquiry or investigation. The first person to point this out was Igor Shkurin, an independent history researcher. He published his articles under the name Igor Grek. He persuasively and substantively proved that the witches pursued by the Inquisition were not primarily people, but counterfeit coins. However, historians still insist on the unmotivated cruelty of the Inquisition, a monastic division of the Roman Church. In reality, the monks of the Dominican order, the most powerful order of the Roman Church and organizers of the Holy Inquisition, simply did their job. They found counterfeit coins and verified their authenticity in various ways. Witches were tested with water, because counterfeit coins usually had a different density of metal, which could be revealed by alternatingly weighing coins in water and in the air. The practice of subjecting witches to fire tests was carried out because it was observed that real and counterfeit coins emitted different colors when heated to high temperatures. Witches were often subjected to pricking and scratching with needles, which was believed to be one of the most crucial methods in witch testing. In reality, special testing needles, made from noble metals and their alloys, were employed for this purpose. Of course, there were real tortures too. Counterfeiters were tortured to expose the entire criminal network, from the manufacture of fake coins to their distribution. Thanks to the Holy Inquisition, Roman coins, in other words, the coins of the Roman Church, were considered the most reliable means of payment and capital preservation. This is precisely why hoards of Roman coins were found in abundance all across Europe. However, after the defeat of the Catholic League of States in the 30 Years' War, the institution of the Caesars and emperors of the Roman Church was abolished and disbanded, after which the issuance of the Roman denarius was stopped, which until the mid-17th century in Western and Central Europe served as an international currency, like dollars and euros today. On a world map from 1652, the Dutch cartographer Nicolas Pescator symbolically depicted the rise and fall of the secular power of the Roman Church in Europe. He did this through the representation of its 12 Caesars, from the first, Julius Caesar, to the last, Domitian, after whom there would never be more Caesars of the Roman Church. At the height of their military and political careers, some Caesars became pontiffs, that is, Roman popes. For example, Julius Caesar became Pope Julius I, and his grandnephew, or simply nephew, Octavian Augustus, became Pope Julius II. It's a miracle that quite accurate portrait busts of Octavian Augustus and a similarly accurate portrait of Pope Julius II by Raphael Santi have survived, which shows similarities in minute details between these two historical figures. In fact, it is the same face. In one of the following films will be announced the final part of the answer to the question of French scientists. Why is there no American silver in Spanish European coins of the 16th to 17th centuries, and at the same time, American silver is present in ancient Roman coins? By the way, part of the answer to this question in the form of a hint can be seen in this engraving. And for those of you who don't just want to learn about history, but truly understand it and grasp the cause and effect relationships within, I'd like to recommend my book, The Other History of Roman Empire. I can't thank you enough for your time and attention. Wishing you all the very best in your historical discoveries. With respect, Alexander Tomansky.